Is there real evidence for life after death? The accepted scientific view is that life is ended by death. However, some scientists have for many years investigated claims that consciousness survives. But if people can continue to exist separated from their bodies, where are the signs of this possibility among the living? Do we have elements of personality capable of surviving death? In other words, is there a paranormal dimension to life? Many people believe in the paranormal. A Gallup poll in 1990 said 3/4 of Americans and half of all Europeans accepted some form of life after death. 1 in 4 Westerners even believe in reincarnation, but believing is not evidence in itself. It may just be an indication that many people feel there's more to life than physical existence.
Have you ever felt an awareness of God?
Yes, I can say that.
Have you ever felt an awareness that you were in the presence of someone that died?
Yes, I think I can say that I have felt that.
It was my mother, I felt that she was at the bottom of the bed. I woke up one night and there was somebody at the bottom of the bed.
My granddad died before I was born, but yeah, I do get a feeling from that.
Just a feeling inside. I mean, you can never prove it, I don't think. Some people have more real feelings. I just feel a little bit that she's still alive in some way.
Good morning, the Gallup organization. May I help you?
Large numbers of people not only believe in paranormal phenomena and in psychic phenomena, but actually in many cases they themselves have experienced something in the area of the paranormal. Those are not necessarily the traditionally religious experiences, but the broad range of experiences have happened on a very immediate and personal level to nearly half of the populaces of the United States and Great Britain.
Today, some scientists say a belief in the paranormal can be supported by evidence. A leading investigator is Professor Ian Stevenson, a psychiatrist at the University of Virginia. He's examined claims of reincarnation and life after death for 30 years.
I think science should pay a lot more attention to this problem, to the evidence that we have, imperfect as it is. It's, if looked at fairly, I think it's extremely impressive. And the evidence comes from a variety of sources, from children who remember previous lives, certain instances of apparitions, and people who come close to death and recover. So there is a variety of evidence from several different sources pointing toward a life after death, and I think it deserves a great deal more investigation.
The idea that people can survive without their bodies has been researched in many countries. Hundreds of sightings of apparitions have been documented and analyzed. There's a survey of widows in which more than half claim some encounter with their dead partners. In another report, hospital doctors and nurses said many dying patients believe they saw apparitions come to take them to the next world.
Let's get it down to CICU. Get a bed down there, please. Bob,
Best documented of all are surveys in scientific journals of thousands of patients brought back from the brink of death by modern medicine. Many say they experienced another dimension of existence.
Well, how's April doing today?
Dr. Melvin Morse investigated hundreds of these near-death experiences in adults and children. He's convinced they're not simply hallucinations.
What I found in children is a common core experience that virtually all children have. And this core childhood experience consists of leaving the physical body, seeing their own body below them with people attempting to resuscitate them, entering into a world of darkness, and then encountering a beautiful, brilliant light. A light that they often associate with love, or as one patient told me, there are a lot of good things in that light.
The Eastern belief in reincarnation is another aspect of the evidence we shall look at later in this series. The Dalai Lama of Tibet is a famous example. He's believed to have lived before, as all 13 previous Dalai Lamas. All the children in this Buddhist ceremony are said to be reincarnations of dead monks. The East has its own view of death.
Tibetan Buddhism, we believe rebirth theory. Therefore, that means one way like changing clothes. But the person remains continuously. I think life has certain limitation. Therefore, this body, which cannot remain permanently, at a certain time, it has to change. However, the person or the being, the continuation of the subtle consciousness. So that always remain continuously. So anyway, something like is it taking new clothes and abandon the old cloth.
Reincarnation is rejected by the vast majority of scientists. So are other forms of life after death. Science takes the materialist view. Life is destroyed by death.
With regards to life after death, you want to be very clear what question you're asking. If you're asking a scientific question, then you're tied up with genes, hereditary factors, brains, bodies, and it's quite clear that they don't survive. Now, if you're talking about subjective experience, then you are asking a non-scientific question, and the answer will be non-scientific. Now, there is no reason why personal experience in some form or other shouldn't continue.
It's a classical scientific debate. Are we machines made of flesh, controlled by a brain acting like a computer, with everything collapsing at death? Or do we have an extra dimension, an aspect of personality called mind?
The assumption is that when your brain dies, your mind perishes also. That is so deeply believed that scientists fail to understand that it is, in the end, an assumption only. And there's no reason why aspects of the mind shouldn't survive the death of the brain. But to shake that belief among scientists of today is extremely difficult.
If any aspect of the living can survive death, it's likely to be mind. But do we have this potential? We looked at people who claim to reach beyond the range of physical senses.
6-1.
Some of the most famous tests for the paranormal were carried out at Duke University in America over 50 years ago.
4-6.
The subject is trying to predict and influence the roll of dice.
2-1.
In charge at Duke was Professor J.B. Rhine, who devised these Xena cards to measure telepathy, or ESP. The subject tries to guess each card as it comes off the pack. 5 symbols in a pack of 25 means she should get 5 right by guesswork alone. ESP is never judged on a single test. The subject should get more than 5 correct on average over a long series of tests.
You got 1 circle, 3 crosses, 2 waves.
At Duke, they claim to have demonstrated that ESP was real. Certainly some people got more than 5 right.
8, 9, 10, 11. That's marvelous.
The modern name for telepathy is psi. The most successful psi experiments are Ganzfeld tests. Here, Tessa Cordell of the BBC, who claims no psi powers, is being prepared for a test. Half ping-pong balls cover her eyes, and headphones will eliminate other distractions. In another room, a volunteer randomly selects a set of 4 slides and puts one in a projector. Telepathically, he tries to transmit this image. Tessa, with no knowledge of any of the slides, will describe what she sees in her mind's eye. Afterwards, she'll be shown all 4 pictures. Only if she can pick the target slide is the test a hit. The odds are 4 to 1. She might get it right by guesswork. So there'll be a series of tests. In the past, other subjects have scored impressive hits.
I have an image of a volcano with molten lava inside the crater, or molten lava running down the side of a volcano. Now I think of the water as a way of putting out flames. And suddenly I was biting my lip as though lips had something to do with the imagery, and I see lips out in front of me. And the lips I see are bright red, reminding me of flame imagery earlier.
There have now been 39 Ganzfeld studies reported over the last 15 years involving this particular methodology. These studies have been conducted by investigators in 14 different laboratories and involve almost 1,200 individual trials. The overall average success rate is 34%, where 25% is what would be expected by chance. So there's a 9% overall deviation from what would be expected purely by coincidence, and that result is enormously significant. The odds against chance are in the trillions to 1, and even critics of parapsychology now acknowledge that these results cannot be attributed to chance.
Tessa's target in the Ganzfeld test we recorded was a flock of birds. For 30 minutes, she recorded her impressions.
A shooting star, a comet, something moving through the sky downwards.
It's a house like a Hansel and Gretel house, like a wooden house with a pointy roof.
There were a number of very different images. Later, Tessa was asked to place the pictures in order, from the most likely target to the least likely.
This would be considered a direct miss. She scored the correct target as low as possible. And any particular trial, like this one, is only an anecdote in itself, even if she had gotten a direct hit.
It seemed a total failure until Dr. Sondau compared Tessa's statements with the other 3 slides. ESP displacement is the name for psi directed slightly off target. Compare Tessa's statements not so much with the slide of birds, but with the other 3 slides.
A point, like a metal railing with a point. A wide open mouth, like a shark's mouth, with pointed teeth, like something out of Jaws. Waves like surfing waves. The front of a ship, like a Viking ship. The pointing part of the ship that used to look like a bird. Eyelashes. A very big eye, like right up close to a Buddha's eye. It's closed.
Were we to get a whole series of numerous examples of what looks like naming various aspects of the pack, we could test this statistically by comparing it, having an independent judge comparing her imagery to this whole pack versus another pack selected at random.
These 4 pictures were drawn randomly for comparison. None matched anything Tessa had said, but the slides in the original test were much closer. The Viking ship and the Buddha were named directly. As a Ganzfeld test, it was a miss, but an intriguing one.
A dragon's tail.
The best results that we've obtained involve students from the Juilliard School of Performing Arts in New York City, which is one of the world's leading performing arts centers. And students there are extremely highly selected on the basis of artistic ability. They produced a 50% success rate. And an example here would be the subject who is talking continuously throughout the session about men with beards.
And there's a man with a dark beard and he's got a sharp face. There's another man with a beard. Now there's green and white. I can see him from behind. I can see his hat, and he has a sack over his shoulder, and it's like for apple seeds that he's strewing around. Window ledge, just looking down, and there's a billboard that says Coca-Cola on it. And there's a snowman again, and it's got a carrot for a nose and 3 black buttons coming down the front.
Well, this was the Coca-Cola advertisement. This is the only session out of 355 where the subject actually mentioned Coca-Cola. He does not mention Santa Claus. It is not an absolutely exact literal hit, but it has many elements, including the 3 buttons running down the front of Santa Claus's suit. The time of year is picked up in the reference to the snowman, and so on. In the past, the kinds of targets that have been used in ESP experiments have been pretty dull. We found a much stronger result when senders were viewing movie clips or documentary sequences than when they were viewing static pictures.
A cat, and then a Black Panther, and then some shots from Life on Earth, the part about the African plains and the lions hunting, and a Black Panther going stealthily through jungle.
The subject started by getting an image of a cat, and this transformed into her memory of having seen this particular episode of Life on Earth. In other words, she actually named the target, and she had no idea, nor did anyone else except for the sender, what the actual target would be. So here we have an indication that there is actual communication of information going on.
Some vertical object bending or swaying, almost something swaying in the wind, wheat perhaps, some thin vertical object swaying, bending to the left. Some kind of ladder-like structure, but that seems to be almost blowing in the wind, almost like a ladder-like bridge over some kind of chasm that's waving in the wind. This is not vertical, this is horizontal. Bridge, a drawbridge over something. It's like one of those old English type bridges that opens up from either side at the middle. The middle part comes up. I see it opening. It's opening.
It would appear, if psi is real, that we have capabilities that extend beyond the nervous system as we currently understand it, that is able in some way, currently not understood, to obtain knowledge, information from a distance, sometimes even from the future. And if these claims are correct, as we believe at least some of them are, then this casts an entirely different light on how we view the nature of man and his place in the physical world.
The newest training ground for investigators of psi is in Scotland, at Edinburgh University. In recent years, opportunities for psi research have diminished in the West, where half the research centres have closed through lack of funds. At Edinburgh, Professor Bob Morris sees to it that today's parapsychologists take a rational view of evidence for the paranormal.
We are charged to investigate what have been called claims of the paranormal, specifically the claim that certain people apparently have the ability to interact with their environment through new means, ways that we don't presently understand. Some of the experiments we're conducting at the moment are attempting to understand more about how we can be deceived, or deception, how people can mistakenly observe things, how their basic framework understanding or their beliefs can make them miss certain things, exaggerate the importance of certain others, and so on. In some respects, this even is the study of magic.
One of the students is encouraged to develop his skills as a close-up conjurer. The first thing to know when investigating someone who claims psychic powers is how to spot a fake.
We're focusing a lot on how we can be misled in all innocence or by clever others, to misinterpret coincidences, to misinterpret our ability and exaggerate it. We're trying to understand how to take better observations sort of out in the real world where we may not have quite so much control over things. There are frequently claims that people can make things materialize, and we know that this has been able to be done by skilled conjurers for years and years and years.
The emphasis is on explaining the seemingly paranormal. Here, response times are measured to barely visible threatening and non-threatening pictures. Perhaps we can sense something before we become consciously aware we've seen it. Today's parapsychologists are not easily convinced. The researchers even have some doubts about the existence of psi itself.
I think it quite possible that psi may exist as simply a minor feature or variation of our lives, or it may turn out to have characteristics that really are analogous to the early days of studying electricity, that it is something that can be developed, enhanced, built into something much more powerful. We just don't know because we don't know enough about what its operating characteristics might be. We still have to try to figure out a lot why it really hasn't been around more than it has so far. I think this is a very strong question that can't be underestimated. If psychic functioning is real, why don't we see it more often? We must understand why that is so, and we must always be open, I think, to the possibility that it's not around more often, because in fact most of the times it's been around, it's really been simulated or faked.
So could we demonstrate genuine psi on television? In New York, we set up a single remote viewing experiment. At the ASPR, Tessa and parapsychologist Keith Harari were recorded by a remote camera. Tessa would simply try to project her mind to a secret location in the city where Dr. Nancy Sondo would be standing. No one has any idea where the doctor's gone, only that she'll be there at 3:15.
Nancy should be almost there. So you can focus in on Nancy and what she's experiencing, what she's seeing around her, and the sights and the sounds and the smell or whatever it is. You can just sort of imagine yourself with her in a way. What comes to mind about the kinds of things you're experiencing there?
It's not noisy.
Okay.
Doesn't seem to be noisy, as if the noise is at a distance.
Mm-hmm.
A path.
A path?
Yeah, I think. Yeah, a path, a concrete path or a gravel path. I think it's like a T. I think it might, there may be a path like that. I think.
Why don't you sort of turn around and look behind you at this place, or even behind Nancy where she is now?
I think there's tall trees there, but they're not close. It's just these sort of, if you look up, you can just see the branches coming over, but it's quite tall.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I don't know if there's a stand down at the far end of the path. Maybe like a summer stand, a bandstand, or something white with railings and a pointed roof.
Do you want to draw something about that? You can put it on the same paper or another page, whatever you like.
I mean, we have these back home. I have no idea whether you have them here, but just sort of like a summer house with steps, like a summer bandstand, and a roof with railings, I suppose. We must be able to get in somehow, but I don't know where. Quite ornate, in white. There might be a statue somewhere there, a tall statue, like a bronze or a metal with a concrete base, quite tall.
Can you draw something like that, or?
This is all concrete. This may be lower. I don't know whether there's steps or not. It's either something with wings, or which is, I don't know what it was, like an angel or something. It's like a butterfly. It's not a butterfly. No, it's like either something with wings and a long robe in that sort of what I suppose it would be, where the metal tints are sort of greeny colour.
Okay. And turn around in some new directions.
I can see small shops off to the left-hand side.
Tell me about that. That's something new.
Across, sort of out of the park, but it's not that far away. There's like small delis, and one may, well, looks like it's got a red and white striped canopy over it. Just a little row of small shops.
Tessa drew everything on a single sheet of paper. A T-shaped path, clump of trees, a small building behind a fence, a statue with wings and its base, and a striped awning on a shop across the street. With this drawing to help him, Harari set off around New York. He had to look at 4 possible locations he'd been given. Only if he matched Tessa's descriptions to the site where Sondo had actually been is the test a success. First location was Lincoln Center.
Okay, nothing initially except that it's a peaceful place. No statue. Buildings are fairly large as opposed to the small structure. I don't find this T-shaped walk. There are some shops off to the side. There is a sort of red and white awning over there. Okay. No statue, I don't think. No, I'm not very powerfully gripped by this place. It's got some subtle aspects to it, but that's it. So let's go. Let's check out the other stuff. Okay. Okay, we're here at Trump Tower. It's very noisy. It's very crowded. Don't see any statues or any T-shaped paths. This would not be number 1 on my list, that's for sure. So Trump Tower, I would have to put down as not very likely. 79th Street Boat Basin, and we do have a path here in a kind of park-like setting, but I don't see anything like this area in here, in this rotunda, in her description, in Tessa's description, nor do I see boats or this harbor area for the shoreline. So I would have to say that this is not a really strong possibility. Okay, first thing I notice is I come up this path that does come to a kind of a T. There is a statue with wings. Well, it's very hard to ignore having somebody describe a statue with wings and finding a statue with wings. Statue is turning green, and she did mention that the statue had green to it. There is a cement or stone walk here. There are trees around. Take a look over here. There's another small structure over there that could also relate to this. Tessa also described having the city sort of surrounding with the street nearby this park-like area, and then having shops across the street and a red and white awning, which I see there's a red and white striped awning. And this is more definitely red and white than the sort of terracotta-shaped one that we saw at Lincoln Center. That's really red and white, no denying that. So we have the trees, the wings, the awning, the stores, the park-like setting, the statue, the green on the statue, the sort of small T-shaped walk coming into this place. So I am going to, I'm going to have to, I mean, there's no choice. I'm going to have to rate this number 1 if I'm going to rank order them. Of course, I've been thinking about this as I've been going along. Lincoln Center would probably be 2. The Boat Basin 3, and Trump Tower 4. But this is a big number 1. I mean, this has so many correspondences that it'll be very interesting if this is not the place.
A telephone call to the ASPR confirmed this was the correct site. Nancy Sondo arrived with Tessa, who was not told where she was going.
Does this look familiar?
Yeah, it looks very familiar.
What looks familiar?
The wing, it's quiet. That looks like my bandstand.
You said it was peaceful, like the park.
Yeah.
You had high trees, all trees.
Yeah.
There are some wings. Okay.
Definitely. I said this was that metal that goes green.
Oh, you said that. Right. You said the metal went green.
Yeah. It's green.
And there aren't a lot of people here. You can hear the city. Oh, I have something else to show you.
Oh my goodness.
You see that?
That's incredible.
What do you notice?
The shop with the red and white striped awning.
Yes.
The canopy.
Is that something or what?
Yeah.
The little shops, right? So,
amazing.
Congratulations.
Thank you. That is incredible. Yeah.
There really is a phenomenon. You can demonstrate it experimentally. You can see it happening. But the interpretation is very foggy. It's as if we're back in the 16th century studying electricity. We may not even have the right metaphors to work with. We know that something that we don't understand is going on. It has to do with the physical world. It has to do with how consciousness interacts somehow with matter and energy and time. So physics is incomplete.
For 300 years, science accepted that physical reality was governed by the cause and effect laws of Sir Isaac Newton. Matter seemingly behaved with the predictability of balls on a billiard table. These mechanistic ideas are in disarray because of quantum physics, the science of matter at the smallest scale. Some paranormal effects might become accepted science if quantum speculations are correct.
It's made the whole world seem very mysterious and almost unvisualizable. In fact, it's incomprehensible even to the scientist, really. All the scientist can do is do calculations and say these calculations predict the results of experiments, but he doesn't have a very clear mental picture of what exactly is going on.
Einstein's discoveries earlier this century undermined traditional ideas of reality. Quantum theory, verified by recent experiments in this French laboratory, seemed to demonstrate that matter might be in 2 places at the same time. 50 years ago, Einstein wrote about spooky action at a distance. In psi research, remote viewing tests the apparent ability to know what is happening somewhere else seem to have a parallel in quantum physics.
You can only explain experimental results if you try and picture a situation at all, if you're prepared to assume that what you do in one place has an influence in the other place. And so therefore it seems that modern science is telling us that distant parts or separated parts of nature are actually connected together in a very mysterious way.
There are many things about quantum theory which are puzzling or mysterious, and of course one of these is that particles can be in 2 places at once, if you like. But there are also very mysterious effects which seem to indicate that you can send signals over large distances in a way which is not constrained by the speed of light. Now, it's not true that you can send signals, but as I say, they seem to. What these experiments indicate is that you can't consider separated objects as, in a sense, being separate from one another.
The true nature of the universe is a mystery. Today's physics lacks any overall theory. One quantum speculation is that consciousness is the underlying reality in the universe. The mathematician Sir James Jeans said the universe looked like a great thought. The astronomer, Sir Arthur Eddington, said the world was made of mind stuff. If people have minds as well as brains, in a universe made of thought, almost anything becomes possible.
There is, I think, evidence within the body of knowledge that has been accumulated that mind can act outside a brain. In other words, one can have influences from one person to another, which don't seem to use accepted physical channels. And at the moment, we call that mind. Now, if this turns out to be correct, then quite clearly the world, as we understand it, is a very different place. And it will require two things. Firstly, it will require physics to be rewritten, because we're talking about action at a distance. And secondly, it will require a totally different science, a science of consciousness. And that is where we need to go now.
Most people believe in a mechanical universe, and quantum theory, while it poses many questions, has few answers. If there is a paranormal dimension to reality, the door may be open to the possibility of life after death, perhaps as a dimension of mind. But most scientists reject the paranormal out of hand.
The reaction of a vast number of scientists has been just to say this is nonsense, it's pseudoscience and so on. I think this is a wrong conclusion, and we will in the future see this kind of thing eventually becoming routine science. A sort of thing which, a statement which is often made in this kind of connection is that when something unorthodox comes up, scientists first of all ignore it, and then they say it's nonsense, and then eventually they say it's obvious. It was obvious all the time. And I think we'll get that happening in the areas that you're exploring in your programs.
Millions of men and women have been killed in wars. For over 100 years, scientists have investigated claims that sometimes the dead are in touch with the living. Scientific surveys show those who died suddenly are most frequently seen again. So might these dead exist somewhere in another dimension? In war, many come close to death but recover. A number have what scientists call a near-death experience. They believe they glimpse death but live to tell the tale. In October 1965, an American soldier in Vietnam saw himself in a dream, gun in one hand, a pair of crutches under his arm. A month later, when his frontline base came under mortar attack from the Viet Cong, Dave Cook had a typical near-death experience.
And the fourth round came over top of my head, and I turned and looked, and 6 feet away the round hit. And everything at that point seemed to go into slow motion, okay? I could see the rocks, the colors of them, and everything else, just the hole just starting to open up. And it was just lazily going through the air, it seemed like. Another round came in and just hit just a few feet from where that one was, and I see what had happened to me. Like the whole ground in front of me was red. Okay, my knee section from here to here was gone, and that was where I experienced this near-death experience. All right, that was that I lost so much blood that I was in convulsions and I lost my eyesight from bleeding to death. And at this point in time, my life went from when I was born, and I could see it in vivid technicolor. The purest colors that you could ever possibly imagine possible was here. And it went in just phases like this, and it just went right in front of my eyes until the present day. And after I went through my life here, there was a long black tunnel, and I presumed that it was square or rectangle because the light at the end was in a square. And it was way down at the other end. It was pure white. And as I proceeded down this tunnel, the rays and that at the end started projecting out, and I mean beautiful rays, and everything was peaceful and quiet. And as I entered this chamber here, you would have felt, or I felt at that time, that you'd have to squint, but because of the brightness of the light. But it wasn't in that fashion. It was so pure of a white You just look all around you, and it was 360 degrees around me. And there was no spoken words or anything at this point in time. And so my answer to what I perceived was a question to me was, I screamed, "No, I want to see my son." And that's when the company exec officer, when I was back, and he yelled to the sergeant, "Give me a belt for a tourniquet."
A few months after Dave Cook lost his leg, his premonition came true. His first son was born. Today, medical science routinely brings people back from the brink of death. Gallup polls say millions worldwide have had near-death experiences similar to Dave Cook's. Most are convinced they truly glimpsed a dimension beyond death. There are others too who believe in contacts with the next world. They say that certain living people can speak to the dead.
Spiritualism, ladies and gentlemen, it is not about death. It's about life. Your loved ones are walking by your side. They're with you now. In this very room, there's a host of souls. They are here not because I am here, but because you are here. Somebody here knows Ian. Is it here?
My name's Ian.
Ian.
Yes.
Someone keeps coming to me here. I thought it could have been your father.
Spiritualism was founded in America last century. The visions and voices that seem to appear at some seances are claimed as manifestations of the dead.
J and the other is D. So he's given me two initials.
Those are his initials.
Those are his initials.
Partly to investigate spiritualists, the Society for Psychical Research was formed in London in 1882. Its scientists put mediums to the test. The eminent inventor Sir William Crookes had just investigated the famous materializing medium D.D. Hume from America, whose powers were said to include levitation. Crookes set out to expose a fake, but his published report said the medium was genuine. He said Hume called on him and, before witnesses, made this accordion float freely in the air, playing a tune, Home Sweet Home. As a further test, Crookes put the accordion in this electrically wired cage. It continued to play. Over the past 100 years, the Society has accumulated volumes of claimed evidence for life after death. Much of it does not impress today's investigators.
The materializations that were produced then seemed to me to smack very strongly of fraud and conjuring all the way through, as indeed do ones that I have seen myself much nearer, the only difference being that whereas it was cheesecloth in those days, it's nylon net curtaining now. So I remain unconvinced by that aspect of things. Now, when it comes to the rather less striking physical happenings, like raps and object movements taking place in the vicinity of a medium, then I do think there is some quite striking evidence for this.
This experiment in table turning is by a group in London who say they've levitated a table right off the ground. It didn't happen when we recorded. Later we used an image intensifier to allow the group to work in darkness. The table stayed on the floor. The Victorian explanation for levitation was lifting by ghostly hands.
As far as physical mediumship goes, what's around today is absolutely minimal compared to what it was in the late 19th century. And there could be many reasons for this, including, of course, that now that we can virtually see in the dark with quite small bits of apparatus, it's extremely difficult for fraudulent mediums to get away with it.
Right, see, no problem.
The group sent us a video of one of their own experiments. They claim this is true levitation, not a fake. It's impossible for us to tell. Watch the table again in slow motion.
There's a lady here, and oh, she's so mischievous, is this lady.
Oh, yes.
And she was but a person that you couldn't help liking.
I loved her.
Yes, that's it. She's just written a name there. Is it Veronica?
That's right.
What's your name?
Veronica.
Well, there you are.
Mental mediums who relay messages from the dead have frequently intrigued investigators more than materializing mediums. The test is, do these mediums really display insights into people's lives they could not get by normal means?
Come on.
Yes.
Yeah. She says to tell you she's met Kitty.
Oh.
Yes, you know Kitty,
Yes.
don't you? Oh, and Flo. Florence, someone named Flo. Is that correct?
Yes.
And also Mrs. Cook.
Yes.
Yes?
And the mediums that we have had, the most famous ones, tend to be showmen and showwomen who like big audiences and the bright lights. It's impossible to assess in any unbiased and scientific sort of way what goes on in a public demonstration of mediumship. The only way one can go about investigating mental mediums is by bringing selected sitters to them in private, preferably persons whose identity they don't know. Now this was how Mrs. Piper and Mrs. Leonard operated.
Some famous mediums of the past were tested by scientists for years under strict control. Mrs. Leonora E. Piper of Boston was the most celebrated trance medium. Her sitters were always introduced as Smith. She told complete strangers such astonishing truths, it was suggested she must be getting the information telepathically from the minds of the sitters. Doubts were cast on the telepathy theory by a series of worldwide communications known as cross-correspondences. Mrs. Piper in America and mediums in Britain and in India each received fragments of messages which only made sense when they were pieced together years later.
Despite the fact that these mediums had off days, sometimes talked utter nonsense, or sometimes got it completely wrong, I don't see how anyone who reads this material carefully can avoid coming to the conclusion that Mrs. Piper and Mrs. Leonard regularly produced items of information that it is extremely difficult to see how they could have come by in any ordinary way.
The American medium Marjorie, wife of a Boston surgeon, was headline news in the 20s and 30s. Her spirit guide was her dead brother, Walter, killed in a railway accident. Walter became famous for simultaneous cross-correspondences. Once Marjorie, in Boston, wrote 11 times 2 equals and to kick a dead. A telephone call disclosed the medium George Valentin in New York had written the figure 2 and no one ever stops. A telegram from Niagara Falls said another medium had also written 2 and HORSE. Put together, the overall message was 11 times 2 equals 22 and no one ever stops to kick a dead horse. Mrs. Marion L. Nestor is over 80. She's one of the last surviving witnesses of the Marjorie mediumship, and she's writing a book about it.
They're there.
Mrs. Nestor's father was the medium's chief investigator, Dr. Walter Richardson.
He was intent on finding something that would rule out fraud. He felt that they would be able to prove there was survival after death. So he invented as many mechanical things as he could to show different things. One was the independence of the voice.
Everyone at the seance held a tube between their lips. If someone spoke, water pressure was seen to drop. This device would show if anyone was pretending to be Walter's voice. Marjorie was tested publicly for many years. She was locked in a glass cabinet. She was bound hand and foot, but she still managed to make objects move and bells ring. The escapologist Harry Houdini said Marjorie was a fake. He tested her in this cabinet. At seances, the empty pan of a weighing scales dropped as if heavier than the weighted side. Under Walter's directions, mediums wrote in Chinese, a language they didn't understand. Rings made of different wood were said to be psychically joined. They could not have been carved like this. But this pair are no use as evidence. They were dropped, and one broke.
He was sure that what they found at Lime Street proved that there was survival, that an individual's mind and personality could survive. He was absolutely convinced. He felt he'd presented all kinds of tests and that she'd passed them all with glory. He never, as far as I know, he never doubted.
But was Marjorie genuine? So-called ectoplasmic hands left fingerprints of dead people in pads of wax provided by Marjorie's dentist. One set of prints was supposedly Walter's. It was said they matched his prints from an old razor. But a fingerprint expert said Walter's seance thumbprint on the left was identical to the thumbprint on the right, and they both belonged to Marjorie's dentist. It was a blow from which the medium's reputation never recovered. Marjorie posed the classic dilemma for investigators. If a medium is caught cheating, does it invalidate everything she's ever done? A scientific survey of apparitions at the hour of death was published in 1979. Hospital staff were asked about apparitions seen by dying patients in America and India. Of 900 patients in both countries, 2/3 said they were visited by a dead friend or relative who came to take them into the next world. 3/4 were willing to go with the apparitions. One of the authors of the report found this surprising.
Life is the strongest thing we hold on. And everything could be dropped, but we want to live. And here, they're ready. And the nurses said they light up. Not disturb, but light up to go. Now imagine if a terrorist came in here with a power to take you away with a machine gun. How would you feel? I would have very cold feet. But here, something, the transcendental vista, the outlook, seemed to be so overpowering that the strongest instincts we have are overweighted. That impressed me.
An Indian pathologist took part in this survey. She was a patient who was seriously ill in hospital. She recalls a visit by her mother and a young student named Kirti.
While I was lying, suddenly I saw Kirti's grandfather coming in, and he was not a very tall person. He had, very thick specs on, and he had his usual dhoti, and he stood there at the foot of the bed, and he said, "Won't you send Kirti home?" And he was very persistent. So I got a little irritable, turned over, and he stood there again, and he said, "Please send the child back home." So when he persisted, at that time I decided to tell Kirti. So I told Kirti, please go home. And at that time I didn't mention that her grandfather was waiting, because I obviously thought that she might have seen him. So she said, "No, I won't go home." So I said, "No, you must go home." Then she said, "No, you are too unwell, and so I would like to stay with you." So I said, "At least please go and ring up from downstairs." So she went down and rang up and found that her grandfather had died about 5 minutes previously.
So I told my daughter, it was a very good thing he was very strict with her. And then she told me that she saw the grandfather by her bedside, you see. And that's why she wanted Kirti to go home.
As a doctor, one doesn't really think that apparitions do happen. So one imagines that maybe it is due to my high temperature, I had a delirium, or I had a hallucination. But as Kirti's grandfather never came earlier, or I never thought of him either. So it was a very strange coincidence that just at his point of death, he should, I should get the apparition of him standing by my bedside.
I believe that she must have seen him, because I believe that people just after death for some time, they do have power to reach and convey the message.
Despite differences in religious belief and death ritual in India and America, the survey of apparitions found that dying patients in both countries had similar experiences. There are many published surveys of people who come close to death but recover. Thousands of people in Asia and the West have had these near-death experiences. There's an international association for near-death studies. From their research has emerged the picture of a typical NDE.
The individual may leave their body. Their consciousness usually goes up onto the ceiling. Then, if the experience deepens, they go down a long tunnel, and then they see at the end of this long dark tunnel a little speck of light which grows and grows in intensity, and it's usually described as white or golden, and they then come out into some sort of landscape. It's very different for different people, and quite often the landscape is populated with figures, some of whom are religious, some of whom are dead relatives, and some of whom aren't recognized at all. There is then usually a life review. Then there is quite often a decision. Do they go on into this landscape and they know that if they do they will die, or do they return to their bodies?
This 15th century painting is by Hieronymus Bosch. The naked figures are dead people being escorted into the next world. Many today believe Bosch painted a real near-death experience. The long black tunnel leading to the brilliant light is typical of thousands of modern recorded NDEs. A young woman was swimming in the ocean off New Jersey in America when she had an NDE. The seas were rough after a hurricane and the swimmer was soon in trouble.
I was thrown under the water and disoriented. I didn't know which way was up. There was a lot of, some kind of rocks and sand, and my bathing cap was torn off, and I had long hair, and I just, in other words, thought, I just thought that I saw where people have a choice. You can give up, because I was so tired. I just didn't know how far I could keep going deep enough under these enormous waves so that I could not be part of the thing that made me turn over. Then all of a sudden, I just noticed that I saw a whole little flash, like of my whole little life. I was only 15, but I saw this like a film, but like a circle. And then I just heard noises, and I just didn't know what was happening. I heard like church bells, crickets, and different, like the wind, but I didn't feel anything else. I didn't feel any pain or anything, and I had, I didn't feel anything, really. And then the next thing I know, it's real dark, and I'm afraid the dark was just black, velvety black. And then it was like this long tunnel, but not all black then, but with little lights like galaxies. And then it was bright, very bright, but like honey color, clear, but honey but not sticky. So it was like a really bright, warm feeling. And I looked and I saw very calm water going into this beautiful garden with 2 angels and some different people I didn't know, all there. And it was just so wonderful. I'd never seen anything like it. And I forgot where I was and everything. I didn't know. I just saw this, and I felt so wonderful. And but then a voice came back to me and said, "Go back." And then there was a blinding flash of bright white light, not like the yellow golden light, but bright, bright white. And all of a sudden, it was funny, it was like putting a jacket on. I felt myself back into the ocean. But then all of a sudden I turned toward shore, and it was as though someone was helping me. I just swam very easily all the way in.
Today, Anne Sharp is an established painter with a studio overlooking the waterfront. Her NDE changed her life.
now I know this will happen to everybody. I do believe that there's life after death. I don't mean life maybe as we know it, but there is a whole different existence. And I got as far as being in this wonderful, wonderful life.
Descriptions of NDEs date back to antiquity. The Egyptian Book of the Dead says the deceased travels towards a brilliant light on a boat sailing along a black river. In the Tibetan Book of the Dead, a person meets a series of beings of light. To study modern NDEs, we went to Seattle, where a higher proportion of people recover from heart attacks than anywhere else in America. In part, this is due to Medic One, a fleet of mobile emergency units who treat heart attack victims the moment they arrive on the scene. So more people live to tell of their NDEs.
Okay, big girl, I'm just going to listen.
A research group called the Seattle Study was set up by Dr. Melvin Morse. They've studied hundreds of NDEs in children and in adults. The children were asked to draw pictures.
This is a picture drawn by a child who suffered an intraoperative cardiac arrest. And he perceived that he went down a dark tunnel, which he's drawn here, and then he saw a beautiful light at the end of it, a rainbow bridge. But he did not get as far as that light. This is a young girl who also had suffered an intraoperative cardiac arrest. And this is her picture of what heaven is, and you can see that rainbow comes back in again. This picture here, I think, gives you a good feeling of what the light is to these children. She described a beautiful light when she was in heaven, and you can see it's not just a light, but it's surrounded by hearts, and it even seems to be anchored on either side to these large hearts. And then here's two spirits, or people that she met in heaven. And you can see they even have hearts attached to them. So clearly this was a joyous and happy experience.
A small boy drew this before he died of leukemia. He had a vision that after death he would live with God in a crystal castle beyond a rainbow bridge. In the eyes of science, all these experiences are hallucinations.
The brain is a past master at making representations of the world. If the brain function is compromised by a near-death situation, then it makes discordant models. So instead of putting consciousness in the brain or inside the skull, it puts it on the ceiling. Instead of having an objective external world, you go into a world which is distorted, a hallucinatory world. Feelings of love and bliss are due to the fact that the structures which underpin these in ourselves are distorted by the near-death situation. So science has it wrapped up. Now the only way of saying whether or not the scientific view is correct is this part about whether the brain is able to leave and obtain information that couldn't have been obtained through the senses. Now there is some evidence that that may be correct.
A child drew this picture of her father running with her lifeless body to the emergency treatment area, chased by doctors and nurses. The girl said she saw it all from outside her body. It happened just the way she said. Dr. Morse has many such cases.
Prior to running across Crystal's story, I had thought the comatose patients were unconscious. She explained to me that she could actually see me while I was resuscitating her. And what was even more extraordinary was that she could give me all sorts of accurate details about what we had done to her. For example, she accurately reported that we had put a tube in her nose. She said, first you worked on me in a big room, and then you took me to a little room where you put me into a big machine. And that was, of course, a 7-year-old child's description of being put into a CAT scanner, which in fact we did. She had never seen me before, and yet she claimed to recognize me and told her mother, that's the one with the beard who was working on me.
Teenager Mark Botts shocked his parents when he was 5 by talking about a series of NDEs. He had them as a baby, less than a year old, when he was in a coma for 3 months. Dr. Moore says that tests show babies can remember things from the age of 7 months. Researchers from the Seattle study look for cases where out-of-body experiences can be confirmed.
I remember seeing like doctors and nurses down, and I remember seeing my bed, and there was like a wall that divided my grandfather and my mother hugging, and I couldn't get through the wall. It was like a big thick wall, and there was no way to get through it to go see him.
He said, you were in the hall, and way down the hall, and Grandpa was holding you and you were crying. And he said, I wanted to come to you, but I couldn't. And I thought, this child was in a hospital room, way down a hallway from me. I was around a corner, and yet he knew what I was doing at that moment. And he knew who was with me. He had no idea that his grandfather could have even been there.
And I just remember floating out, and I could see my body down below. And there was nowhere to go except up into a dark tunnel. And I started crawling into the tunnel, and the tunnel was like endless. It was like dark, you couldn't see no light, and time had no meaning. There was endless. You didn't know how long. I didn't know how long it was. I crawled in the tunnel, and eventually I made it to the top, and it got really super bright, and God appeared, and he said, would you like to go back home? And I said no. And he goes, well, you have a purpose in life and you need to go back.
Mark told his parents he knew what was happening when he was in a coma. He watched his parents playing with his toys. He saw a girl from the next ward having her hair washed. He described his own medical treatment.
I couldn't accept him, like he must be making it up, or somebody told you a story, and after he told us a few more things, what could I say? Just like, maybe you are telling the truth.
When he was telling us these experiences, he said, do you know, and he told us all about the IV. Again, he couldn't have been told, he didn't know about it, and yet he's telling us what he sees and what he remembers, and it's exactly what happened, which made us say, this is real. He knows what happened.
One theory is that NDEs might be memories of the birth process, going down a black tunnel from the womb and emerging into the light of the world.
There are several problems with this theory, the first being that patients who've had cesarean sections still have near-death experiences. And so those patients obviously are not traveling down a tunnel at all. But second, this theory really has a misunderstanding of the birth process itself. When an infant is born, they are not traveling down a tunnel face forward with their eyes open, but rather they are being squashed and smashed through a birth canal with their head flexed and their eyes closed.
The main debate is whether NDEs are hallucinations in a dying brain, a fantasy created to ease the trauma of death. Science accepts that people have NDEs, but can it explain them away?
Now, we have looked at brain processes, and we feel we can explain all of the aspects of the near-death experience except for the light. For example, when there is a cutoff of blood to the occipital lobes at the back of the brain, the patient would then experience tunnel vision. So if there was nothing else to the near-death experience, it could be neatly explained by science. We would then enter into a world of darkness and then simply die. And yet the children we interviewed did not say that the experience ended with darkness. At the end of darkness came a beautiful light, a light filled with complex emotional overtones, clearly not caused by a dying brain, because the entire brain would have to be working in concert to generate both a vision of light and complex emotional images. So it is obvious that this light is not coming from the dying brain.
We could disprove the current scientific view of NDEs, that it's all malfunction of the machine, if we could set up the following experiment. If we were to paint symbols, say, on the recovery room ceiling, and the NDEer was able to obtain this information not through their senses, this was repeated in a number of people, then science would have to acknowledge that in some way information could be transferred from the ceiling to the patient, and that the patient's account that his consciousness traveled and picked it up would then have to be considered seriously. I might say if we did this, we'd have to rewrite our present scientific views of the world.
Coming in, get that room ready, up the light, in case you have
An NDE that's important to the scientific debate occurred in Seattle in April 1976. Maria, a 50-year-old woman, had collapsed in the street. In hospital, she had a full cardiac arrest.
Maria? Maria, are you okay? Maria, I need some help in here. Maria, talk to me.
What happened?
She went flatline. Get the ambu bed.
I happened to be in the doorway, just watching all the hubbub that happens when someone in the hospital is in cardiac arrest. I was witness to the fact that Maria had no heartbeat and no respiration.
Okay, get the drugs ready. We need an amp of bicarb, 2 amps of bicarb.
Later, Maria told the hospital social worker what she thought happened to her when she was apparently dead.
No family. 1, 2, 3.
She found herself up at the ceiling level in the corner of her room looking down on the proceedings. And she did in fact tell me who was in the room, what they were doing, what the equipment was doing. She had everything completely accurate, and I didn't believe her. There's a psychological term called confabulation that we as people do when we don't know how we get from point A to point B. We kind of fill in the blanks. And that's what I thought Maria was doing. She proceeded, though, to tell me that she was distracted by something out of the window. And just by thinking of where she was going, she was there. And she found herself hovering above the emergency room of the hospital. She also proceeded to describe it exactly, with how the doors automatically opened, how vehicles, that they came in from one direction and left by another. All of this I knew to be true. Then she said she was further distracted by an object on the 3rd floor of the building, but in a different part of the hospital. And the real reason that she was upset is because she wanted me to go find this object. It was a tennis shoe, and she wanted me to get the shoe. I wanted to go home. This was weird, but I wanted to be fair to Maria, so I went outside, walked around that part of the building, looked up, I didn't see a shoe. I then proceeded to go from room to room to room. And about that time that I was thinking that I wasn't going to find the shoe, I looked down and found the shoe. And it was an incredibly jarring experience for me. Then I hightailed it back to the coronary care unit, but for some reason I decided to put the shoe behind my back. And I walked into the room far more calmly than I was really feeling. And I asked Maria to describe the shoe again. And for the first time I asked her what color it was.
What color was it?
Azul. It was blue. It was blue, yes.
Maria, I have your shoe.
I was holding a blue tennis shoe. I had no choice but to believe that this woman, who was by all accounts dead, had been out of her body when her body was no longer functioning. And right then, my whole perspective about life and death shifted for me, because Maria was really my great teacher.
De nada.
Science accepts that people have near-death experiences, but explains them as fantasies created by a dying brain. Some scientists disagree.
I feel that we've advanced our understanding to know that at the point of death, all human beings will undergo a sensation of leaving their body and traveling towards a beautiful, loving light. This obviously conflicts with a materialistic worldview. The most simplest explanation for why people would think they're leaving their body and traveling towards a beautiful light would be that, in fact, they are. If we want to apply Occam's razor to this situation, which is that the simplest hypothesis to explain data is usually the correct one, then the simplest explanation to explain our data is that human beings actually have a soul that leaves their body at the point of death.
In a Tibetan monastery in southern India, Buddhists pay homage to the reincarnation of a senior lama. They believe Ling Rinpoche, once senior tutor to the Dalai Lama, has been reborn and is blessing them and the gifts they bring. He's here in the form of a 5-year-old boy. The ceremonies have lasted all day, and in mid-afternoon, this remarkable infant still behaves with the composure expected of a High Lama. Those who queue for a blessing are from many parts of the world and many walks of life. They include Richard Gere, the Hollywood film star. For 30 years, scientists have investigated other children who appear to remember previous lives. Tibetan Buddhists say they have their own ancient methods to precisely identify a child like this, the reincarnation of an 81-year-old Lama who died on Christmas Day, 1984. Is there real evidence for reincarnation, a form of life after death? Tibetans believe senior lamas who choose to be reborn can be traced by an ancient formula. This includes looking for mystic signs in the flame of a butter lamp, consulting oracles and astrologers, and meditation. The Dalai Lama led the search for Ling Rinpoche. A year after Rinpoche's death, search parties went to various Tibetan settlements. They returned with long lists of possible candidates.
The concerned people, you see, gave me full, I say, one quite big batch of paper on the list of the name. Then, through my own investigation, not there. Then I asked them, not here, even though, you see, more than, I think, 500 or something. Then I told them, oh, it seems not here, that they are disappointed. But then somehow, they again, you see, start to fight. Then, near Dharamsala, the place called Beer, one child somehow, you see, they missed.
The child was found in this orphanage at Dharamsala. His mother had died, and his father was too poor to support him. The infant was 21 months old. The search party said he appeared to know them. One member was a servant to the dead senior tutor for almost 50 years.
Chanda, there's going to be Chanda Jikje. The member Chanda Sumja Tashi, Namchite. And the Chira Chanda Duis. As Washington Dinan the Chira Chanda Duis. Chanda Tenda, Bed Chanda Tamatar, yes, imagine Namsanku Komi Chanda. Charlie She. Charlie Sheva Message, Kokomi Chayomaris. Kona Chayomaris. Chayom the Chanda Donish Saraj. Mata, the nature. And elevate his anywhere.
The infant passed the recognition test. He could identify belongings of the dead monk from similar articles. He was declared a tulku, a reincarnated lama. He was examined by the Dalai Lama, who said the child knew his way around the palace and seemed to recognize former colleagues and servants. The new Ling Rinpoche was taken to meet the people in Dharamsala. He was barely 2 years old. His personality and bearing helped to convince the Tibetans and others that he was truly the reincarnated senior lama.
When I met the young boy the first time, right after he had been identified, he came and jumped into my arms and patted me on the head. It acted very much like he knew me. And although I did not believe in reincarnation at the time, or I had no evidence at the time, when I met this young child, I was absolutely certain that it was him, that it was the old man. It felt exactly like it was the old man back again, acting the same way he had acted when I had seen him, which was 7 years before.
Today, this child is 5 years old. The orphanage is a distant memory. The old servant is now the boy's guardian. and they live in a bungalow next to the Drepung Monastery. At the end of this day of ceremonies, the boy, now Ling Rinpoche, will become a monk. The Tibetans say they have several children like this, High Lamas who've chosen to be reborn. The University of Virginia is the center of research into claims by children to remember former lives. Almost 3,000 cases have been investigated by Professor Ian Stevenson. One child in 500 might have such memories, according to a survey in northern India. But the memories begin to fade by about the age of 6. There seem to be fewer cases in the West.
We do hear quite often from the parents of Western children that they wish they'd known about this research when their little boy was 3 years old, because he was saying, I used to be a pilot and I was shot down, and we told him to stop telling fibs, and now he doesn't remember anything, and we can't say much to you about the case. So some cases are definitely suppressed in the West, but they are much more readily found in South Asia than they are in the United States and Canada and Western Europe.
In British Columbia, Canada, there are people for whom reincarnation is an ingrained tradition, the North American Indian. They appear to be Christian, but older beliefs are just below the surface. These beliefs may have come from Asia, because the tribes are descendants of hunters who crossed from Asia when the continents were joined in the Ice Age. In Canada, Dr. Antonia Mills continues Dr. Stevenson's researches. Some claims of reincarnation involve birthmarks, perhaps corresponding to some injury in a past life. These will be checked against medical records. Dr. Mills has studied cases in other parts of the world. She knows there are differences here.
In most tribal groups, the previous personality, the person who is said to be coming back, is closely related to the subject, to the child. And in such cases, it's very difficult to be sure that statements that the child might make are not based on knowledge that the child could learn from its parents speaking about this person. So one has to use a lot of caution in analyzing these cases.
Let us pray also for the doctors and nurses and all those who...
Among the congregation at Maurice-Town Church is 82-year-old Emma Michel of the Wet'suwet'en tribe. Mrs. Michel believes in reincarnation. In this family photograph, she is aged 4. With her is her brother Jimmy, whose battered body was pulled from the Skeena River. His death remained a mystery until years later, when Emma's infant grandson, also called Jimmy, was playing on the floor. The bell in the nearby church began to toll. The boy asked his grandmother why the bell was ringing. Mrs. Michel said it was because a neighbor was dead. The child asked, who?
Donald Gray, I said. Why he died, he said. He hired somebody to kill me that time, that's why I'm died, he says. He hired 3 men to kill me. That's why I'm died too. No, he died, he said, and he laughed about him.
The family believe young Jimmy was the reincarnation of his great-uncle. He described in detail how his great-uncle was beaten up and thrown into the river in a dispute over fishing rights. Gaffing the salmon in the Maurice-Town Canyon is as dangerous as it looks, but it's a source of status and wealth. A chief has rights here, and others must move aside. Jimmy Sr.'s right to fish was challenged by Donald Gray. There was a bitter quarrel. Ironically, the reincarnated Jimmy also died in the Skeena River. He fell or was thrown from this cliff. But his death has not ended the cycle of rebirth.
There's always a cycle that you can't stop, and this is where the reincarnation fits in.
Another of Emma's grandchildren, Nelson, is a pupil at this lecture on the cycles of life. Nelson is believed to be a reincarnation of both Jimmys. His family say that as an infant, Nelson could remember their previous lives. He used to wish he'd been born a girl, so then there'd be less chance of ending up dead for a third time in the Skeena River. Today, Nelson's memories have faded, but he used to tell his family about his previous lives and a car he once owned.
He used to run around the car and he used to tell my parents, and he used to tell them that this was his car. And all the wheels were flat, and he used to kick them and say this was his car, who did that to it. And he was just two and a half. Really little. Very small.
All the children in this game are said to be reincarnates, not simply because of what they remember. Some have birthmarks corresponding with marks on the dead person whose life they spoke about. Newborn babies are minutely examined for telltale signs.
I interrupt your card game. I wanted to take a picture of the bump on your head. Is that okay? Yeah. Your mom said it was.
This child is said to be the reincarnation of an aunt who suffered a head wound before she died.
This combination of statements by the child, birthmarks, characteristics, medical conditions that relate to a previous personality, these have to be examined very carefully, and in a number of cases, the evidence is very difficult to explain. For example, these cases where the children have pierced ear marks. This is not something that would be genetically transmitted.
Birthmarks on the ears are similar to scars caused by earrings worn by chiefs. In some cases, a tribal elder has had an announcing dream, saying that a chief has been reborn. An examination of the baby has then revealed the matching ear marks.
I have not been able to think of an explanation that accounts for the phenomena in these cases other than reincarnation. But what reincarnation is, what is being reincarnated, that's of course still a very large question that's not fully understood.
Professor Stevenson has studied hundreds of birthmarks and birth defects in children who claim previous lives.
I'm particularly interested in a collection we have about 15 cases where there are two birthmarks corresponding to bullet wounds of entry and exit. And forensic pathologists know that nearly always if you shoot somebody, the bullet wound of entry is small and round, and the bullet wound of exit is large and irregular in shape. And that's the way our birthmarks, in about half of these cases, they correspond exactly that way.
This boy was born without a right ear, but with memories of the life of a man who was shot in the head.
He remembered the previous life of a peasant farmer, this was in Turkey, who went to sleep at the end of the day in a pasture, and a neighbor came along hunting rabbits, and in the twilight mistook this sleeping peasant for a rabbit and shot him with a shotgun at point-blank range. We were able to go to the government hospital where the wounded man had been taken, and there we found a report showing that he died about 10 days later of hemorrhage in the brain. And this boy had memories of this man's life and his death.
The skull of a Turkish miller killed by a blow to the back of the head with a flour shovel. This picture is from the official post-mortem report. Later, a child claimed to remember the miller's life. The boy had a misshapen skull. Violent death occurs frequently in Stevenson's best cases. He speculates that the trauma of such a death may cause it to be remembered. This Burmese man recalled a previous life as a notorious bandit who was captured and executed for murder.
The hanging was bungled, so that he had to be hanged twice. And the subject, who had the memories of this brigand, was born with a almost absent lower jaw. His mandible was exceedingly small, and his mouth was very narrow and tight, so that he really can only take liquid food, and he can't open his mouth. But birth defects of the kinds that we have in these cases are uncommon, and they're not the sort that you find in the textbooks of birth defects, the monographs, with rare exceptions. A few of them are, but most of them are not.
In a village in northern India in the 1970s, a small boy lost the fingers of his right hand in a fodder chopping machine. Later, the child died, but in a neighboring village, a boy was born who claimed memories of the dead child's life. There was other evidence too. Lekpal's case was investigated by Dr. Stevenson and the Indian parapsychologist Dr. Satvant Pasricha.
अच्छा लेखपाल, पहले जन्म की बातें याद है तुम्हें?
यहाँ पैदा हुई, थोड़े कुछ बाद तब छोटे छोटे थे तब थोड़ा याद करो करते थे, फिर इलाज चलते रहो। जैसे पिताजी ने मों को ऐसे शराब गांजा पियो करते थे, उनने ऐसी मशीन फिराई दी, तो हाथ वो कटियो, हम तो वहीं खड़े रह गए, वो गरियाँ पाँच उनके सामने गिरी जान, तब एकदम बड़बड़ाने भी सब कि लला हाथ कटियो हाथ कटियो,
तब तुम्हारा नाम क्या था?
हुक्म सिंह।
इस पे नाम लिखना जरा फिर से एक बार। Being born with missing fingers is very rare, and the corresponding feature in the previous personality adds to its importance. The same fingers were chopped off. Also, there was no family history of missing fingers, and there was no such case in the whole of village.
Dr. Pasricha says a weakness of the case is that the two villages are only 5 miles apart. Details of the dead child's accident could have been known in both places. Dr. Pasricha went with Lekpal to the house of the dead boy. Inside were the child's mother and older brother. The boy was recognized and accepted by both. Lekpal lives here for much of the year.
तो आपको लगता है कि आपका बेटा ही है ये?
हमारा बेटा है, आइए। हम तो उन्हें बेटा की तरह से भी हमें मातारी की तरह से मानते।
ये आपका भाई लगता है?
हमारा भाई है।
भाई है आपका? नहीं, भाई तो इस जन्म में तो नहीं आपका ये भाई।
इस जन्म नहीं, पिछले जन्म में तो था भाई।
अच्छा, तो अभी भी आप इसको भाई मानते हैं?
भाई है ही।
अच्छा, कैसे यकीन हो गया कि आपका भाई है?
जब मैं वहाँ गया था पहली बार इनके यहाँ, वहाँ एक शादी मैंने कराई थी, तो वहाँ मैं पहली बार गया, तो जब मेरे पास आया मैं 3-4 भाई हैं, सभी जने बैठे थे वहाँ, तो इसने वहाँ पहचान लिया, बोला ये मेरा भाई है, ये हमारे भाई है, एक हमारी बहन थी, हम करीब 50 आदमी घर में, एक ही बहन है मेरे पास। अच्छा, तो हमारी माता जी भी है।
तो आपको लगता है कि आपका बेटा ही है ये?
The mother of the dead boy is certain Lekpal is her son, and not simply because of the evidence of his damaged hand. In Bangalore, Dr. Pasricha is an associate clinical professor at one of India's largest mental hospitals. For 11 years, she studied evidence for reincarnation and investigated 350 cases. Some subjects have a phobia, a fear that seems to come from some incident before they were born. Others have a great emotional attachment for their previous families. One of Dr. Pasricha's earliest cases was a girl aged 2 who remembered life as another little girl who drowned in a well. This was in a village in the same part of northern India. Today, in the Hindu holy city of Vrindavan, Manju Sharma is a young married woman with 2 small daughters of her own.
वहाँ पे पहले गाँव मारे में मतलब चौमा में 10 साल की कुआं में गिर के मर गई, तो मैंने वहाँ पे 2
चौमा में आप 10 साल की थी?
हाँ,
जब कुआं में गिर के
मैं मर गई। हाँ, मैंने 2.5 साल की में जन्म लिया, वहाँ पे पसोली। तो फिर वहाँ पे हमारे ताऊ जी है ना, कपड़ा मतलब तगादा करने जाते थे, तो वो मैंने पहचान ली हमारे ताऊ जी हैं। उसने कही कि नहीं,
पिछले जन्म की?
हाँ, उसने कही कि नहीं हमारी लड़की तो मर गई। मैं नहीं, मेरे ताऊ जी हैं तुम। उसने कहा कि हम तुम्हारी मैया आपको भेजेंगे, तुम यहीं पे रहे। तो उनने मैया को मेरे को पहले भेजा चौमा वाले को, तो वो आए वहाँ पर, तो उन्हें प्यार करा, मतलब मिठाई विठाई लेके आए थे सब, तो उन्हें गोदी में बैठा दी।
As a child, Manju's feelings were so strong, she insisted on living with the dead girl's family for 10 years. Critics say these children are from poor families trying to claim a relationship with a wealthier one. Manju is the opposite. She is a high caste Brahmin who chose to live with a poorer family from a lower caste. In class-ridden India, this is an unlikely relationship. Manju has divided her life between these two families.
मंजू का नाम है ही ना कोई। कृष्णा
अपनी बेटी है।
कृष्णा है जैसे हमारी पहली बेटी ऐसी ये है।
और ये बच्चे आपको अपने
ये बच्चे को नाना कहें हमसे या तो नानी कहें।
नानी बोलते हैं।
हाँ। प्यार से राखे हमने थोड़े कोई दूसरे समझ के राखे हमने।
Manju has outgrown her fear of wells, even of the place where she believes she once drowned.
I would consider this one of the strong cases. She started talking about her previous life when she was 2.5, and whatever she was describing, her emotions would change accordingly, her facial expression would change, and nobody, I thought at that age, would have coached her to stage such a case. I don't think there is any apparent motive in this case to sort of cook up a case. And they were not gaining anything. There were no obvious gains for the present family. In fact, they had to lose their child for 10 years.
Not all Dr. Pasricha's cases were born with memories of another life. In rural India, she investigated a case of possession, a dead person who appeared to survive by taking over the body of someone else. In May 1985, in the remote village of Sharifpura, a young married woman, Sumitra, had a seizure and seemed to die. Her father saw it happen.
अंदाज डॉक्टर लोगों से लगाया, कोई आँख से नहीं, शरीर नहीं, पानी हो चुका था, और तैसे ही अंदाज दिया तुम लगा, तैसे ही लगाई लोग जाते, और तक के बाद फिर ये सांसें फांसें इनकी वहीं चली, परिचय तब भई जब बात कि ऐसी बात आज गई भी है, जो कि हम लोगों को नहीं किसी को पहचाना इन्होंने, 2-4 दिन किसी को नहीं पहचाना, तब हमने खुद बातचीत करी, तो कुछ खड़ी बोली आई, इनकी बोली में फर्क पड़ा, तो इन्होंने कही हमारा तो हम है नहीं कोई, नहीं फिर कि ससुराल मेरी दिव्या पर पियर मेरा हटावा, और जो कहूँ बहु नहीं कही ससुराल पियर दिया है, जका बात है।
Sumitra insisted she was this girl, Shiva, a young housewife whose death was reported in some newspapers. Her body with head injuries was found beside a railway near her home. But Shiva had been murdered, claimed Sumitra, and her in-laws had tried to make it look like suicide. There was some effort to bring the husband's family to trial for murder, but there wasn't enough evidence to prove the charge. Shiva's father heard about the girl in the remote village who claimed to be his daughter and went to see her. The girl recognized him immediately and spoke in detail of Shiva's life. She convinced him she was his daughter.
तो फिर थोड़ा हमारे आंसू भी आ गए, हमने कि जब इतना बतलाती, फिर उसने बच्चों का नाम लिया, सब पूरा अपना, उसके बाद जो है इस तरह से सब, फिर हमने उनसे कहा भी ठाकुर से रुके भी, तो दूसरे दिन हम यहाँ लेकर के आए उसे, जब यहाँ लेकर के आए तो मैंने वाइफ को जो था अलग बैठा लिया था, इसी मकान में थी जब आप आई थी, तो मैंने कहा जब उसने देखा तो उसे कोई यही नहीं दिखानी कि मम्मी कहाँ है, तो उसने कहा यहाँ तो मम्मी है नहीं, हमने कि देखो इन्हीं में बैठी और लेडीज थी सब,
तो वहाँ सब औरतें थी, वहाँ बोली कि मम्मी तो यहाँ नहीं है, फिर उसके बाद में पिताजी इनके बोले मम्मी को देखो कहाँ है, इधर उधर देख के तो कमरा में पहुँची, अंदर हम बैठे थे, वहीं जाके मम्मी मम्मी कह के रोने लगी हमारे।
Dr. Pasricha checked Sumitra's statements against published accounts. The girl gave 16 facts about Shiva's life not mentioned in any press reports. Sumitra identified 22 relatives of the dead girl from photographs. 5 years after Sumitra allegedly became possessed by Shiva, we called unannounced at the isolated village where Sumitra lives. Sumitra agreed to talk to us, but made it very clear she was as certain as ever about her inner identity.
अच्छा, ये पूछना है तुमसे सुमित्रा मैंने कि
नहीं सुमित्रा मत बोलो मुझसे।
हाँ, अभी शिवा ही हो तुम?
हाँ, क्यों क्या होकर के इस दुनिया में जो पैदा हो जाता है वो क्या बार बार बदल जाता है बहन जी?
अच्छा, नहीं पहले बदल चुकी हो ना तुम इसलिए
नहीं, तो मैं एक बार जब बदल चुकी हूँ, जब मैं एक बार शिवा हो चुकी हूँ तो क्या बार बार सुमित्रा बन सकती
तुम अभी शिवा ही हो?
हाँ, और क्या सुमित्रा बन जाऊंगी?
तो सुमित्रा के बारे में तुम कोई बात याद है?
नहीं है, वो मैंने पहले ही कहा, वो अब कह रही हूँ।
शिवा के बारे में तो तुम्हें क्या क्या याद है?
वो पहले बता दी थी, जैसे बचपन से। हाँ, 2 बच्चे हैं वो भी आप जानती हो।
अच्छा।
हाँ, जैसे खत्म हुई थी वो भी मैंने बता दिया था।
Dr. Pasricha also found evidence of changes in personality and behavior. Sumitra, the barefoot village girl who never went to school, has become more like Shiva, the educated daughter of a school teacher.
After the changeover, she started wearing a sari in a different way, very dignified way, and also her chappals, sandals she'll put on, and she started addressing her husband also in a different way. Earlier she used to call him by his sister's name, so and so's brother. Then she started calling him in a very sophisticated way, and also she started writing. Before the changeover, she could not do anything, means she could barely read and write. But after the changeover, she could write sentences and she could speak also. I mean, she could read written Hindi.
Dr. Pasricha and her colleagues recognize that where reincarnation is taken seriously, people often have a more tolerant view of unusual behavior. They have different ideas about the makeup of human personality.
Are people something more than a combination of genes and the family environment? Just think of the way the average Western parent regards his or her child. It's exactly the same as one regards an automobile that's come off a factory line. There was nothing before these bolts and bits and pieces of the car were assembled and painted. And that is the standard view that Western parents have of their children. They make the child. The attitude is quite different in countries where there's a belief in reincarnation. There is this third component of some existence before the conception of the current body, as they would see the matter. So that the child bears some responsibility for what he does and says and how he develops.
The island of Sri Lanka in the Indian Ocean has provided some of the best cases for researchers. Buddhism is the main religion and reincarnation widely accepted. Investigators try to obtain untainted evidence. Their aim is to record a child's memories of another life before anyone knows the identity of the dead person the child is talking about. Several important Sri Lankan cases have been investigated by Professor Elenda Haraldsson of the University of Iceland. He's with the Sri Lankan researcher Godwin Samararatne. They've come for a further meeting with 6-year-old Dilukshi. For the past 3 years, this little girl has been talking about a previous life as a small child in a district 70 miles away. A life that ended when she fell in a river and drowned.
Ammai tatai nangi mali.
Ammai tatai nangi mali.
Dilukshi still remembers another set of parents and brothers and sisters. A Colombo newspaper had published Dilukshi's memories before any previous personality was discovered. The story was read by the father of a dead girl who said Dilukshi's account of a drowning matched the life and death of his daughter, Shiromi. The reporter took Dilukshi to the home of the drowned girl, where she made several recognitions.
ඒ වගේම එයා පෙරාත්මේ ඉස්කෝලේ යන කාලේ පාවිච්චි කරපු ගල් ඇහැල්ල පැන්සල ඒ වගේම එයාගේ චිත්‍රපොත ඒ ළමගේ ඇඳුම් පැළඳුම් එයා ගෙනිච්ච උණු වතුර බෝතලේ අවුත්හාන් නාඩිය පවා ඒ ළමයා අඳුරගත්තා.
දැන් මේවා දිල්රුක්ටි එහාට ගෙනියන්න ඉස්සෙල්ලා මේවා සඳහන් කරාද?
මේවා අපි පත්තරේ සඳහන් කළා. මේ පත්තරේ අපි සඳහන් කරලා තියෙන්නේ එයා යන්න ඉස්සෙල්ලා කියපු විස්තරේ.
We filmed another reunion between Dilukshi and the dead girl's parents. Before the newspaper brought them together, these families were quite unknown to each other. They lived in widely separated parts of the island and are still a little shy with each other. On a previous visit, Shiromi's father gave Dilukshi a silver whistle to match his own. The first time Dilukshi met Shiromi's mother, she said, "Mother, I've come home at last." The reporter, Abby Parler, said Dilukshi had recognized some of the dead girl's toys and books. According to Professor Harrelson, this was useless as a scientific test. Shiromi's possessions should have been mixed up with objects that had not belonged to her. As it was, anything that Dilukshi pointed to could be taken as recognition of something belonging to Shiromi. 10-year-old Shiromi had drowned in this river near her home a year before Dilukshi was born. Dilukshi led the way to the riverbank and showed where she remembered falling in and striking her head on a rock. It was the exact spot where Shiromi drowned in 1983. When Dilukshi visited here for the first time with the reporter Abby Parler, she identified the same place.
Dilukshi had further stated that there had been a footbridge across the stream, and close to that footbridge was her father's paddy fields. And when we think of Shiromi, her father, Mr. Anatunga, he owns these paddy fields, and there had in fact been a footbridge here over the stream. So all these statements concerning the stream, they fit the life of Shiromi.
Part of Dilukshi's story was verified during filming. She remembered a shop near Shiromi's home run by a youth known as Thin Boy. The only likely shop had been closed for years. Professor Harrelson stopped to take pictures, but unexpectedly found himself being introduced to someone.
So this is the Thin Boy. This is Hin Malay. Yes, who used to have the shop here.
A bonus for Professor Harrelson was that the Thin Boy remembered the drowned girl, Shiromi. She used to come into his shop. Harrelson regards this as a strong case. In a tropical downpour in Sri Lanka, a father escorts his daughters home from school. 10-year-old Subhashini has a fear of storms. During another downpour when she was 3, the terrified child told her parents about a landslip on a mountainside during a thunderstorm. It was on a tea plantation where, she said, she had a different father and mother. Subhashini no longer has these memories, only a fear of storms. Her mother remembers what she said.
Amma එදත් හරියට වැස්සනේ. මේ වගේ වැස්සා වහිනකොට මේ කන්දක් ආවනේ එකපාරට අපේ ගෙදරට. ගුඩු ගුඩු ගාලා සද්දය ආවා. ඒ එනකොටම අම්මා කෑ ගැහුවා මේ මොකද්ද ඉන්නේ සද්දයක් එනවා අර කන්දවත් එනවද කියලා බලන්න කියලා. ඊට පස්සේ මෙයා තාත්තයි මේ දෙන්න ටෝච් එකක් අරන් එළියට ආවා. එළියට එනකොටම අපි ඔක්කොම හිර වුණා. ඊට පස්සේ මම මොකද කරේ කියලා ඇහුවා. එතන කිව්වා මං ඊට පස්සේ දුවගෙන ටෝච් එකක් අරන් කුලිය අපිට ආවා.
When Subhashini was 3, she demonstrated to her parents how tea was picked. She described the bushes in detail, although none grow where she lives. She said the tea pickers were Tamils, except for her own family of Sinhalese Buddhists. They lived in lines, which her middle-class parents didn't understand. But lines are the tea workers' name for their terrace shacks. they lived in Gampola, 60 miles away. Stevenson's researchers found there had indeed been a disaster on a tea plantation at Gampola 2 years before Subashini was born.
There was lightning and thunder, and at about that 8 p.m. the rocks above this came down with mud and water, and it slipped down here, covering all these line rooms, half the line rooms, and it went down below about 200 to 250 yards below. I think about 28 people died on that, but unfortunately we were able to recover only about 13 bodies.
Documents from the disaster inquiry confirm that the victims were Tamils, except for one family of Sinhalese Buddhists. They had a 7-year-old daughter, Devi Malika, who seemed to match Subashini's statements. What happened to that family?
There were 5 living at that time in that house. All were killed. These 2 who survived were outside on that special day.
Devi Malika has a surviving brother and sister. Subashini's first visit here was abandoned when the child became hysterical with fear. Later, she met these 2, and they believe she is their sister reborn. Devi Malika's body was never recovered. Some of Subashini's details of life on this tea plantation were unverifiable. But the researchers say 25 of her 32 statements match the life of Devi Malika. Along with the other cases, is this story convincing evidence for reincarnation?
I think where the evidence has led us is that whereas formerly a belief in reincarnation depended on religious traditions, scriptures for certain countries, oral traditions for others, now at least one can point to evidence. And the evidence is not flawless. Every case has some weakness or other. But there is an accumulation of quite strong evidence from, I would say, 100 cases. Even for those 100 cases, there are alternative possibilities of interpretation, but reincarnation is certainly a plausible. I would say in some cases it's for me the most compelling interpretation, even though it's not the only one.